Hey, what's up? And welcome to episode 13 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview top DFS players about the mental health and lifestyle of playing DFS at such a high level. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, and in today's episode, I chat with Ken Lin, who goes by swaglordken on FanDuel and DraftKings. Now, Ken is primarily a small field DFS player who has countless five-figure GPP wins, but he also places a major focus on sports betting. And the reason I wanted to talk to Ken in this episode is because he recently decided to risk his entire bankroll on the NFL draft. So I chatted with Ken about that decision, why it's important to take bankroll shots, especially when you're younger, the grind and time required to feel confident in taking those types of shots, how to decipher good information versus bad information, and the lifestyle of a gambler in college, especially during COVID. Now, we have plenty of interviews lined up for future episodes, so make sure you don't miss any of them when they are released. You can subscribe here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. And if you enjoy the interviews, please leave a like on the YouTube video or a 5-star rating and review in the podcast apps. We'd greatly appreciate it. Let's get started. All right, so it is time to talk to Ken. Ken, what's up, man? How's it going?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. And so you and I, we've worked together for over the last year and a half, I guess, in esports, and we've theory crafted a bunch of different ideas for various sports. But I'm glad to actually get down and sit and talk to you, the person, about your lifestyle and not necessarily what's the best lineup we can create today.
Yeah, I was honored when you invited me to be on. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yes, I want to ask you that initially because when I first asked you to be on this podcast, we talked about this whole story a couple of weeks ago. And when I first asked you, you were a bit hesitant. Why was that?
I was hesitant because you've had guys who've won multiple milli makers. You've had guys who've won poker bracelets, and I'm not even close to like the level that some of the guys you brought on. So I didn't want to damper the quality of the podcast because it's really good. So I was hesitant there.
Well, I appreciate the comments and the compliments about the podcast, but I have a feeling that it won't dampen the quality because your story is so interesting, and I think it applies to a lot of people out there who want to take gambling seriously, whether it's sports betting, whether it's DFS, it could be poker, it could be investing, NFTs, whatever it is. And there's so many out there early in their career that the psychology of what you went through, I think, is super important. A lot of people can probably relate to it. And I'm trying to capture the spectrum of the emotional bankroll from the beginning all the way to the end, the highs and the lows. So I think this will be a great episode. So before we get into what happened to you in the past week or so, let's start with the background first. And we'll start with sports betting because you play DFS pretty seriously, you sports bet pretty seriously. Starting with sports betting, how did you get into that initially?
Growing up, I was naturally a big sports fan. I was also a big numbers guy. So when you kind of combine the both, you end up in sports betting or gambling some way or another. And then I was probably maybe 15 or 16. So I was trying to get into my first sports book. But obviously, a bunch of offshores and stuff like that, they still have verification. So I had to go through a crypto book, which was Nitrogen. So that was a Bitcoin sports book. So back in 2015 or 2016, I was purchasing Bitcoin to deposit into Nitrogen so I could gamble it all away instead of, because Bitcoin was maybe $600-700 back then. So that was a mistake. So I had like a couple $100 to my name when I was 16. So I deposited into Nitrogen, started gambling, and then I think I'm similar to a lot of bettors where you watch sports, you're confident that you can beat sports gambling, and then you end up losing a lot. So that's how I ended up, and that's where I started off.
Oh man, the crypto books, the amount of 7 Bitcoin bets I made back in those days, looking back, that would make me a very rich man today is certainly depressing to think about. That's for sure. But obviously, everyone starts early and you get into it. When did the tide start to turn and you started to take sports betting more seriously? And when you did, what was that bankroll like when you started to put a focus on it?
I don't even know if I could say like when I started taking it seriously. I was working maybe summer jobs. I had part-time jobs throughout when I graduated. So maybe when I was 17 or 18, I was actually already working and had some spare money. And I was like, so I just use it on gambling. I wasn't a big fan of, I didn't buy much like clothes or food. Like I didn't spend much money elsewhere. So I put in my gambling accounts and then, start gambling. Did I win? Probably not a lot. When I would say I started taking it seriously was probably after this year's Super Bowl. I actually had just graduated. I made some decent money on the Super Bowl. I was like, okay, I can kind of do this, so I'll dedicate more money and time towards gambling and DFS.
Yeah, it definitely helps once you graduate and you'll have those responsibilities. And we'll get to that at the end of the show because I think that balancing school and gambling is an interesting topic as well. So, was it after the Super Bowl, before the Super Bowl, when you made that first big bet that was outside of your normal limits? I think all of us listening have experienced this, that one bet that gives you that exciting slash sickening feeling in your stomach. Do you have a vivid memory of that bet?
Dude, I've got like so many, and not even from after Super Bowl, from before in 2018. I was watching baseball, and then there's a certain Twitter guy. And it's a long story, but he was a big Astros backer, so I jumped on the wagon with him. So I had the Astros to win the World Series in 2018, and then they had lost in to the Red Sox in the semis or the conference finals there. So I had lost there. I had maybe 500-600 bucks, which I didn't really have at the time on the Astros outright. In 2019, I ran it back again with them, and they had lost in the World Series with the Nationals. So that was another 500-600 bucks that just gone. I burned so much money on them, and so there's been a lot of bets and a lot of ups and downs. But I think when you get the sickening feeling, it's probably sometime early on when you have a small bankroll and then you kind of become really confident and you overextend yourself early on. So nowadays I'm pretty kind of neutral and not don't get too sick or excited nowadays.
Well, that's good at least. And yeah, you're right because 500 or 600 bucks to someone listening to other guests on the show seems like absolutely nothing. But 500 or 600 bucks when you're 20 years old or 19 years old is a large portion and a pretty big bet for most people. So I totally get that. Now, if we look at DFS for a bit, when did you get into that, and what propelled you to start playing? From what I see every single day, you in the $200 to $400 GPPs in pretty much every sport.
Yeah, so as you probably know, I started playing once COVID started. There wasn't anything to bet on, so I always knew DFS was kind of around. So I was like, let me check this out, and then so I got into daily fantasy sports probably right when COVID started, sometime April May 2020, and then I gotten really lucky. I'm sure you know, but I got really lucky in September where I won 50K on NFL Showdown. So I mean that's a huge bankroll boost. And now lately, as I've been playing, I've been learning more, and I've been playing these higher dollar GPPs. So actually, I'm primarily a small field player. Like I only play small field contests. So my downside isn't as big as these pro betters or pro DFS players who are 150 maxing, because they'll probably lose a lot of money on the slate. But if you play small field contests, chances are you'll min cash one of the lineups or something like that. So you won't lose as much money. So I've got some backstop there, which kind of allows me to play these higher dollar contests without feeling too bad about it.
Yeah, and the upside's not there, right? But that's not necessarily what you're looking for. You have the safety there. And so you win the 50K, and obviously we talked after that, and you were definitely humble about it. Was there a point after that 50K win where you're like, oh yeah, I'm real smart. I got this? Or were you pretty serious about it and pretty realistic that I got pretty lucky, and if I'm going to continue this success or grow my bankroll even more, that I have to take this more seriously?
I think when a lot of people win a lot of money, they become overconfident. I'm the shit. Like I can do this. But as time goes on, you start to realize how lucky you was, and I was seriously very lucky. Looking back on it now, and so I was really lucky. But I'll take it, and it was a good bankroll boost. And now I think I'm a better DFS player than I was when I won the 50K. So I mean I'm willing to go and play these higher dollar contests now because I think I'm better at it.
Would you say you're confident now? And if so, when did you become confident in your DFS play if it wasn't after that 50K win?
No, I'm never confident. Like you can't be confident in this. I'm only confident in the fact that I'm not confident. Because I think if you're confident in anything, whether it's betting or even DFS, that you'll kind of become overconfident and you won't adapt as much, or you won't realize if something needs to be changed, and then you could really get yourself into a hole if you just kind of keep losing because you're so confident in your process. So I'm always willing to adapt and change, and I'm trying to listen to as much as possible and what people have to say. So I'm not confident at all. I'm not even sure if I'll win tomorrow.
I mean, that's smart advice, though, right? You can never get too comfortable and always looking to improve your approach and whatever it may be. So now, how is your time allocated between betting and DFS and other endeavors since you're graduated? And I don't know if anything else is on your plate.
there's not really much on my plate. I did a lot of betting because like information market. So right when I graduate, the Oscars was last month and the draft just finished. So I did a lot of betting then. I also played DFS on the side. I think actually I hurt myself by doing that. By doing both at the same time, it's a lot of work and you kind of have to mix. Like I bet golf, but I also play DFS golf, and it's two different things. But sometimes you kind of bet on one golfer and then you kind of fall bias in DFS, and it's like, should I play this golfer? Like I already have high owned, and then they get high owned. So golfers you bet are usually see a lot of ownership, which don't make for a best DFS play. So I mix both together, which is not a good thing. But after now the draft is over, I'm mainly playing DFS. I'm not betting as much. I'm just throwing away money on like NBA playoffs and stuff like that.
Well, I was going to ask you because if you play both, if you bet and play DFS, how do you compartmentalize? How do you separate the two? Let's say on a Wednesday, and maybe you already have your golf bets in, but by Wednesday, I assume, right? But maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, you're looking at lineups, you're putting in your bets for golf. Do you separate the two? Okay, now I'm going to make my bets, and then I'm going to make my DFS lineups. Like you separate it in a time component, or are you moving back and forth? Have you figured out the right balance to that?
Yeah, you definitely have to do something like that where you have to separate. I don't think you can do both at the same time. For every sport, I think it's a bit different. So for golf, I mean I'll bet on some guys and then I'm a steam chaser. I'll admit that. So I usually see who the sharper betters are on which golfers, and then I kind of weigh them more heavily in DFS as someone who I'm looking to use. So I'll bet golfers, and then I'll build some lineups. I don't think it's a good idea to try to factor in and mix both, like I said earlier, but I still end up doing it, which is not great. But I think for every sport is different, but you do have to separate, and you can't really do anything both at the same time.
Right, because the inputs and the outputs are both completely different, and the goals and what you're trying to accomplish are completely different. So, you mentioned betting on information markets, and the main story why everyone is here. Let's talk about that. Deciding to risk it all on the NFL draft. And as I said in the intro, you bet essentially your entire bankroll on the NFL draft a couple weeks ago. And the day after round one, that was a Friday, I messaged you because when you and I were talking, I could tell there was a sense of excitement, anxiety in some of these bets. And so the next day I just basically asked you, I was like, how much did you actually bet on this draft? Because it seems like a lot. And your response was, I quote, basically 100%. I flushed out everything that I could. And that took me by surprise, obviously. But before we get into the whys and hows, at what point did you actually decide that you were going to do this for the draft? A quick timeout to remind you that this episode is sponsored by the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy, powered by DFS Magic. Are you tired of expensive DFS optimizers not providing the settings and tools you need to create profitable lineups in all sports? Check out the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy, created, built, and used by top DFS pros. Use it to hand build entries or automatically create up to 150 lineups using optimal lineup criteria and sport specific settings. Visit occupyfantasy.com/lineup builder for more information. Now back to the show.
I'm not sure. It just kind of ended up being 100%. But I knew I was betting the draft pretty early on. After I bet the Super Bowl, during the Super Bowl, there are a lot of props and low limit props and very soft markets you can hammer. So that's kind of always where I've made money. Like I've known that for 5-6 years that I can kind of hammer these information and prop markets. So after Super Bowl, it went on to the Oscars. So I focused pretty heavily on that, which is another information market. And then after the Oscars, I knew it was the NFL draft. So I knew pretty early on I was going to bet on the NFL draft. I didn't know it was going to be this much volume on the NFL draft, but I had a sense, a calendar in mind, I guess.
All right, so you mentioned the Oscars twice now, so I have to ask you, what was that about, and what was the level of success for that?
I mean, the Oscars are pretty crazy. I don't think there's anyone else to bet on. So actually, the Oscars, many people don't know this, but they do a bunch of award shows. They call it award season. So even before the Oscars, they've got British Film Awards, they've got Screen Actor Awards, and those are usually good precursors to determine who wins the Oscars. So maybe on the Sundays, the couple Sundays before the Oscars, I was tuning into these like British Film Awards to see who had won. And there's still sports books who leave the line hanging. But if someone wins at the British, and then there's a good chance they'll win at the Oscars. So once they announce the winner of whoever won at these British awards or Screen Actor Awards, I mean, I started hammering them to win the Oscar because Like it's a good edge there, and you can probably make some money doing that.
And was that the first time you bet the Oscars, or you just read about this and you're like, okay, I need to do this?
No, the Oscars have been something I've been betting a lot. Like one of the most exciting bets was when Parasite, the international movie, they won the 2019 or I think 2019 Oscars. So they had won Best Picture, and so that was a big thing. And I had decent sized bet on that as well. So the Oscars always one my favorite times of year to kind of bet on because it's so exciting and to hear when your movie gets announced as Best Picture and hopefully you can win some money that way.
All right, first of all, I'll have to go back and edit the intro to include Oscar specialist in your biography for sure. And I have a similar story. So I'll tell you a quick story about an Oscar sweat. It was, to this day, the dumbest bet I've ever made. This was back when The Artist won Best Picture. And back then, I was betting on credit with a local. And for some reason, my credit with that book was, I think, around 40K. And by the time Sunday rolled around, I wasn't even planning on betting or watching the Oscars, but there was word that The Artist was essentially a lock to win. And basically every sports book took it down. Like you said, some books left bets hanging for you. And my local left this hanging. However, the line was minus 3,300 and the max was to win 1K. So I said, well, if this is basically a lock, I can max this. I can get a free 1K in my pocket. And I didn't have 33K to my name. But I max bet 33K to win 1K on what I assumed was a lock. And so I was actually at my parents' house at the time, and I said, "Hey, can we turn on the Oscars? I'm just curious to see who wins Best Picture." And they're like, "Why do you care about this?" I was like, I was reading about it. I want to hear." Fortunately, The Artist did win. I didn't get beaten to a pulp by my local for not having 33K, but it goes to show that once the information is out there, those bets are available.
Yeah, that was the easiest winner of your life.
I
So
mean, by win loss, yes. By anxiety and emotions, absolutely not. It was the worst bet in that regard.
yeah, you got lucky that they didn't do like a Moonlight La La Land thing where they announce the wrong Best Picture and then someone else wins.
I
That
would
would
have
have been the worst.
I would have had a
Yeah,
heart attack for sure.
yeah, probably.
All right, so let's go back. So you bet pretty much your entire bankroll on the draft after the Oscars. You get a nice little boost from the Oscars. You bet your entire bankroll on the draft. And Ken, there's a lot of survivorship bias and similar success stories, whether it's Bob Voulgaris in his infamous Lakers championship bet back in the day to grow his sports betting bankroll. Abnormally dissed on Twitter, who's not on Twitter anymore, I guess, but he talked in a podcast growing his bankroll to a huge level, just hammering and maxing NFL teasers in the preseason. And there are a lot of stories like that. And obviously, there are stories we don't hear of people who do that all the time and don't make it, right? But it is a common occurrence, I would think, for successful sports bettors to have this big double up early in their career. So I assume that was in the back of your mind in some way. Why the draft and why risk all of it?
I mean, I've been following gambling Twitter for so long, and I even mentioned this to you earlier that every year after the NFL draft, these bettors will tweet out, "I wish there was more drafts tomorrow," or "There should be drafts every day," or something like that, because everyone had won so much money on it. And I was like, I could see where people are winning money on it. There's a major information edge if you kind of follow along and you keep your ear close and you see what reporters are saying. So, I mean, I thought I had decent sized edge, and I was willing to push it because I know I'm not beating any other markets. I definitely wanted to go all in on the draft, and I guess it was pretty heavy in the end.
All right, so start from the very first 2022 draft bet that you made. Let's start from the very beginning of the process. When was it? What was the bet, first of all? When was it? And why did you place that bet?
A very prominent fantasy site that I won't mention had posted their draft props for free, and the very first one they posted was Iquanu number one overall, and this was right when he finished the combine, and he had crushed the combine, and the Jags were picking first, and they probably needed an O lineman, so that was one of the first ones I placed. It's like March 3rd or March 4th, so it's still the first week of March, so it's pretty early on, and sportsbooks only really have the number one overall, but they were still hanging pretty bad lines. So I got some 5-to-1s and 7-to-1s on Iquanu number one overall, and that was the first bet I made all draft.
And was that like a sizable bet for you, or did you keep adding to it after the fact?
I was like, I don't think this line could get any worse, so I actually put like 600-700 bucks on it. I tried to get down as much as possible, but some books they'll take max 200. So in the end, I probably had $700-800 on it.
So,
So it was pretty sizable because I kind of knew I think I could have bought out if I wanted to.
what you ended up doing, basically, right? And so your first bet was a loser. So 0 for 1 to start start the
Dude, yeah.
process. So, but you end up being really heavy on the actual number one overall pick, Walker. When did the tides turn there, and when did you start hammering that bet?
I'm not even sure. I was listening to podcasts kind of, I mean, throughout the month of April just to kind of get more info. Once the Jags had franchise tag Cam Robinson, then they were in play for an edge, and everyone just kind of assumed it to be Aiden Hutchinson. So I'm listening to podcasts, and I mean, I'll shout out Will Brinson, who works in the NFL, I guess, as a reporter or something like that. But he had an inside knowledge that Walker was seriously in consideration for the Jags, and they were still hanging plus 175s, plus 200s, plus 300s. So he had mentioned it on a podcast that he was in consideration. So I was like, okay, let me bet some of this. And I went pretty heavy on this because I didn't think the line was right because it was plus 165. And honestly, I thought it was 50-50 just because of some of the comments that Brinson made about the Jags GM. He doesn't like short arms, and Hutchinson had like the shortest arms ever. And I think the funniest part that never got mentioned was that Hutchinson went to Michigan, who was coached by Harbaugh, and he used to work with the Jags GM Balky in San Francisco, and they hated each other, and like they had a blood feud. So I think it was super petty to not give Michigan or Hutchinson the glory of being number one overall. So they didn't like each other. So I mean that's something that you kind of only get the info you get from listening to podcasts and stuff like that. So I put stock into it because the NFL is such a dumb league. It should never happen in a $1 billion league. But I thought that was a legitimate concern, actually.
You're right. That should never happen, but it does, and we see the dumbest things happen all the time. So clearly, you listen to a lot of podcasts to prepare you for all of these bets. What was a typical day of grinding like leading up to the draft?
It was like the worst. It was so bad. I mean, you try to get info everywhere. Like I'm going on YouTube listening to mock drafts. Daniel Jeremiah is a big NFL reporter, and he's a big also knows a lot about the mock draft. So he's someone you keep an eye on. And I mean, I watch YouTube videos where he was doing mock drafts, and if he's saying stuff like whoever is here at 12, then flip the card. And then if their over unders is 12 and a half, that's something you probably have to bet under. Like he also used to work for the Ravens, and I think it was the own Baltimore Ravens Twitter account where it was like Daniel Jeremiah predicts our pick to be Jordan Davis, number 14. And his over under was 15 and a half. So I mean, you had to hammer the under because Jeremiah is someone who nails the Ravens pick because he used to work for them. So this is something you kind of gotta keep an eye out, and that's a typical day of kind of grinding and trying to get info everywhere and anywhere you can.
Yeah, absolutely. But you were waking up early. I know you started in the morning until you went to bed, basically grinding these props, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm on basically online all day trying to get more info. I'm also doing some work, like DFS work or betting work. But if you keep your eye out on Twitter and refreshing NFL draft news, so I was up pretty early. I think later on, close to draft day, maybe a couple days before, where Peter Schrager, another NFL reporter, and he had an insight with the Jets organization, and he said his mock draft was coming out at 7 a.m. Eastern. So I had to set an alarm at 4 a.m. just to kind of see who he would mock to the Jets at 4 because that was good info. So it's got to take something like that to if you want to kind of do this seriously and make money.
I mean, that's a lot of commitment. Did his intel help you, that 4 a.m. alarm?
Dude, he had the right pick, but I got baited by a Jets reporter who's like they wouldn't take Sauce Gardner at 4. So I didn't have anything on it, but he had it all along, and I'll note that for next year because everything you go through this cycle this year, it's gonna be the same guys next year. Like there's not gonna be different. Like the same guys are gonna work with the same works. So that's something I'll note.
So do you have detailed notes on which reporters to trust and which teams to trust and which mocks to trust?
Yeah, all the time. Actually, before the draft, there was a guy on Reddit. So there's a Redditor. I think he did his own site, but he went to each team subreddit and he was like, "Who are the reporters you can trust the most?" Like he made that post, I think, for his own website. But that was really helpful. Like you get insights from fans of which reporters you can trust. So they mentioned a bunch of guys, so I threw them all in Twitter lists, and that's one of the things I used following up to the draft this year.
Right. So, okay, at what point was the grind officially over? Was it on draft day or was it a couple days before? Like, how up until the wire were you grinding this?
Dude, I didn't even like it wasn't even on draft day. It wasn't even after draft day because there was day two I had to grind, and I wasn't even ready for it. It was like so crazy. Like I've been grinding up, and then on draft day, I still had some money. Like it was a good idea to kind of unload any money you had left on draft day. So I was doing that on draft day, and then during the draft, there was like live betting at one of the offshores. So I was trying to hammer offense, defense, or even any leaks that potentially come through. So I was hammering as late as I could. I was grinding during the draft, and then day two came, and there were day two lines, which I wasn't ready for because I was counting all the money from day one, so I wasn't even ready to get down on day two. But apparently there's still some good soft day two lines, so I got some money down on that too. And then maybe after, I mean, on day three, you're still sweating like punter under over unders. So I guess you're done on Saturday after draft is officially over.
So sick. Well, now you know for next year when you go double or nothing that you got to save some for day two.
Yeah, I actually I did a dumb thing where I withdrew some money and I didn't have enough as much as I wanted to get down on day two
Well, now,
after day one.
well, now you know for next year it's all
Yeah,
about that
yeah.
experience. So, all right. So when draft day rolls around, I want to know your emotions behind it because when you wake up and whether it's the start of NFL season or whatever you get excited for, I say you in the general sense for those listening, right? You have that kind of kid on Christmas morning feeling, or you have that sick in your stomach, nervous wreck feeling. What were the emotions for you knowing that your entire bankroll, for the most part, was going to be decided later that night?
It was the worst. I was just kind of excited to get over with. I think I probably messaged you and you probably got the sense too that I was excited to get over with,
Yes.
and it couldn't come soon enough. Like it's something you've been doing for a couple months, and then leading up to draft week, you get a lot of info, and then like stuff changes a lot in the 48 hours leading up to the draft. So on the day of the draft, I mean, I was ready to go. I was excited, but I couldn't wait for it to be over with because this is something that drags out way too long.
Yeah, I mean that's a long grind, dude, for months, and then you're still never completely sure about the bets you have made. What was your tracking process like, by the way? Did you? I assume you had some spreadsheet of tracking what you needed when and what bets you were overweight on and where you had your most exposure, right?
Yeah, kind of. It was pretty bad. It was like every time I made a bet, I just kind of added to the bet list. So, it's like how much you risk and what the odds were. But I didn't have a good tracking system on what I needed. Like I even mentioned, it's like, what do you need in this draft? Like, I don't know. I have bets on everything. So, but yes, it's very important to track stuff. So I kind of knew what I needed and what I had. But I mean, there might be like some random bet you made in March that you're not even sure that you remember you made, right? So it's always important to track stuff.
So at what point during the draft had you won enough that you could actually exhale and be like, okay, no matter what else happens, I'm at least good financially. I'm getting enough back that this isn't a stone disaster. And then prior to that, once the draft started, once Goodell comes on stage, the Jags are on the clock. When was the peak anxiety?
Dude, I was like never. I was like, I wanted to keep winning. I mean, they announced picks to draft. I was like, okay, this is going pretty well. Like when it was pick 31 or 32, I was screaming, yeah, I need a safety. Someone draft a safety. Like we need this.
So sick.
There's a lot. Yeah, like you could be up 30, 40K. I was like, no, someone's got to draft a safety. So I wanted to keep winning. But after first overall was Walker, I was probably break even at worst. So that was probably when I'm okay. But I was pretty anxious just even before the draft. I mean, number two was still in flux. Number one, I was kind of confident that Walker was going first, but he was still sitting at like minus 400, minus 500. And usually people hammer it to minus 5,000. So there's still kind of questions there. But number two was even like the biggest question because it could have been Thibodeau or Hutchinson. I actually genuinely thought that there was a good chance it would have been Thibodeau, and that would have thrown the whole thing in flux. And I definitely wouldn't have made out as good as I did if it was Thibodeau instead of Hutchinson. So I was pretty anxious, probably right before draft.
So, and that's the thing, right? Like you don't think of your bets being correlated, but a lot of the bets are, right? You're betting who's going to go two, who's going to go three, how many of this position go before this pick, right? So one pick could literally derail your whole draft.
Yeah, it's literally so bad. It reminds me of a couple years ago when the Raiders drafted Cleveland Farrell. I think it was fourth overall, and no one saw it coming. So that throws you out of whack. And a lot of people fall into this trap during even this year's draft betting, where they bet the unders. But if you bet the unders on everyone, you'll squeeze out. Like there won't be enough spots for everyone. It's like musical chairs. There aren't enough chairs for everyone if you keep betting the unders. I definitely lost like a good chunk on like a Charles Cross under, but he didn't fall because he was a bad player. He just fell because there weren't enough spots left for him to be drafted high.
And that makes sense. And so, wait, so real quick, you mentioned that once Walker went, you were break even at worst, which means you had a lot of money on Walker. Then, do you care to share what the total risk reward was on Walker to go number one overall?
Dude, like so much money on Walker. Like I'm not even I'm not even sure that it like if I had to guess, I probably had 5 or 6 thousand on him straight up to go first. But I also had trifectas, exactas, I don't know, like what you call them, like Walker first and a bunch of other props. So I probably had, if I had to guess, like probably somewhere around 10,000 on him to go first. But I was pretty confident in the end, I guess.
So 10K on him to go first, and a lot of those bets were big plus money, or at least sizable plus money, right? So 10K to win, much more.
Yeah, on the draft, it's actually you probably make more money if you bet just a bunch of long shots. And going into this year's draft, it was so unpredictable. So a lot of the long shots hit, which is where you made a majority of the money.
That's awesome. So was there, besides the Walker pick, was there a bet that you were super proud of winning? And that's from like maybe you found a really great line, or you read a situation correctly, or maybe some other reason that you were like, yeah, I got that one correct.
Yeah, like so many. I was pretty early on Stingley unders. He went third overall, but I had some under 12 and a half and 9.5, so I did pretty good there. But I think my favorite one was so actually this one I have marked as a loser and then changed it to a winner. It was Malik Willis being drafted by the Titans, and that was so crazy because no one expected quarterbacks to fall out of the first round. But I have read some news. I had heard that Tennessee could be in play for a quarterback because Tannehill's getting older. He won't be on contract next year, so stuff like that. So they drafted 26, and then they traded down, but Willis was still on the board. So I'm waiting on day two because Tennessee drafts 35 on day two. And then once they passed on him, I was like, oh, some other team's gonna take him later on. So I marked it as a loser. And then it's round three, and these quarterbacks keep falling. And then 84 comes around. I wasn't even watching at this point. I was probably outside doing something else. So and then they draft Willis. I was like, wait, I think I had Tennessee to draft all these quarterbacks. Like Ritter was in play and Willis was in play. So that was one where I changed it from a loser to a winner. So that was a nice one.
You were actually outside for a change, doing something, and not on the computer grinding after the last couple of months. Do you remember what the odds were on Willis to Tennessee specifically?
Dude, it was like 37-1. So it
Sheesh.
was pretty crazy, and they only let me get like $27. So the max I could win was 1,000. So it wasn't too bad, but it would have been nice if the max bet was bigger there.
All right, it still adds up though, right? In the end. So, all
Yeah, yeah.
right, so all this is over. Ken, in the end, would you do it again, not knowing the outcomes? Risk your entire bankroll on the draft?
Dude, I don't even know. I've been reading like all this Twitter stuff where it's like one year people will just get crushed on the draft, and it's gonna be so bad. And I'm not sure how they're gonna do it. They'll probably set like every over unders where there really won't be any spots left if you want to bet the under or something like that. But I mean, next year I'm gonna be betting in the draft. This is probably something I want to do. It's one of the bigger edges when you bet on sports. So if I could do it again, probably. But is it a good idea to do it all over again? Probably not. So there's that.
I mean, did you think about what would happen if you lost a vast majority of it and you lost like I don't know 50K or whatever the amount was? Did that ever go through your head like, okay, if I could lose this amount and if I do, what's going to happen?
Yeah, you always have to consider a downside. Like just total chaos happens, and if I had lost everything, I don't know what I would do. I think I'm in a kind of better position than most, where if I had lost everything, like it wouldn't have been kind of like the worst outcome. Like I just graduated. I'm still pretty young, so I still have a couple options. But I mean, if you're married and have kids, then this is probably not something you should be doing where you're at risk of losing everything. So I did consider that, but and then I went through all the bets, and reasonably I wasn't too bad. After you kind of run through all the bets you made, like you're still doing pretty good. So there's also that factor to consider.
Yeah, I mean, that's the time to do it. And that's when all these other successful sports bettors did it early on in their career. And I think this goes to show for it could be sports betting, but hell, it could be career, it could be travel, it could be relationships, whatever it may be. If you take a risk early, you're still young enough, and especially you have a college degree, right? You're young enough to where if it doesn't pan out a year or two down the road, you can get back what you lost, or you can restart your life, whatever it may be. The key is starting young, and I guess you can do that later in life as well. But like you said, financially, if you have a wife and kids and you're in your mid 30s or 40s, not the most ideal situation if you do lose it all. Where if you are 22 or whatever, you can rebound pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes you get kind of lost when you're placing bets on stuff like this. Because I looked over my tracker, it's like, oh, I've got 30K wagered on the draft. And then you keep going. It's like, oh, now it's 40K and now it's 50K. So if you keep placing bets, sometimes like you get lost and you're not sure of what your potential downside is. So it's always something to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, that's tough, especially if you keep adding to it, right? That number just keeps growing and growing and growing. So, all right, let's talk about your lifestyle a little bit, and we'll move on from the draft here because, like you said, you recently graduated from college. Is it called university in Canada? I always get it confused.
Yeah, I think it's called university. Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure what the difference is. Yeah,
Okay, so you just recently graduated from university. What are your plans for the future? Right now, you're grinding DFS and sports betting, but what are your long term plans?
I'm not even sure. I feel like it's something I should know, but this is fun. So sports betting and defense is a lot of fun. It's like definitely something that I want to be a big part of it in my future as well. So I'm not sure what's on for me in the future. I hope it's something in this space, but I think I'm taking it day by day, and maybe something will come up from this podcast even. So let's see how it goes.
Love to hear that. So if you guys are out there listening and you like what Ken has to say, hit him up, right? So what about your friends and family, Kim? Because I don't know if your friends are into gambling or if they're not into gambling. What do they think about what you do? What does your family know and think? And I guess the big question, because I went through this personally, was you graduated, you got the degree now, you don't have a job currently that uses your degree. So I imagine your parents are like, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? You got your degree." What is that whole dynamic like between your friends and family with your gambling relationship?
Yeah, I think my parents probably not a big fan that I'm gambling or doing something like this just because of like stability. But they're always like, if you can make decent money from it, then they'll kind of overlook the problems they had. So if it's decent money and something you can do, then they're okay with it. So I mean, right now it's okay because I ran pretty hot during the draft and stuff like that. So for a couple months, I'm always looking at it like that, where I can kind of put off getting a so-called real job for a couple months because you win this much money and then it's more time extended. So that's something like that. So my parents are okay with it. I have a bunch of friends who they'll gamble recreationally, but it's like $5-10 on parlays or whatever. So I guess when they'll listen to this, they'll know how much I had on, but they don't really know what I'm doing or how I'm gambling stuff like that.
Yeah, so that was my one concern. It's not my concern, it's your concern, I guess, right? But I was like, how transparent do you want to be on this podcast? Because you may not want, whether it's your parents or your friends or future employers, to know how much you bet on the freaking draft. But I guess it's all out there now.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to kind of be transparent, and that's what like people listening to the podcast want to hear. Like they don't listen to a podcast for people to be squirmy about whatever they did. So I thought it was important to be transparent.
And I appreciate that. And I'm sure the listeners appreciate that as well. I want to go back to when you were in school really quickly because obviously I went through this playing poker through college and trying to balance studies and whatnot. But yours is a relatively unique situation to most gamblers, at least from an age perspective, because you were grinding, and maybe not as seriously as you are now, but you were playing DFS and you were betting while you were in school. But basically, the last 2 years of your studies were affected by COVID. And I don't get a chance to ask many people this question because I can only imagine how difficult it is. What was it like starting college as a normal 18-year-old, then living that college lifestyle? And then all of that is mostly taken away, and you're just confined to your room and your computer for basically the latter half of your college experience?
It was like so wild. I guess it's hard to say because it's not something you expect. It's not something you can prepare for. So it was definitely interesting. I mean, I didn't really mind it because I got to play DFS or even bet kind of a lot, and online classes weren't that bad for me either. But I know some people who really struggled with being online, and then it's not the greatest environment. But I caught on pretty quickly where it's okay for me. Like this could work for me. But actually, during my last semester, I got to go back in person, and that was pretty huge. That was actually like it was nice to kind of be social and even being at lectures or even just kind of seeing anyone like seeing a bunch of students and stuff like that. Like if there are any people who are still taking remote classes and have the option to go back in person, I'd say definitely do something back in person. It definitely makes a difference there.
It actually, I mean, it does impact your mental a lot. And I'll say this for me, it was a socially acceptable excuse not to leave the house during the early parts of COVID. And I could say, sorry, I'm not comfortable going out, when really I just wanted to grind UFC or baseball that night or League of Legends or whatever it was, when I probably could have gone out. I didn't want to. Now I don't have that excuse anymore, but it feels great to actually, like you said, to actually go out and do things. But back then when you had to be locked down, for you, Ken, it just gave you a great excuse to bet and play DFS even more.
Yeah, for sure. Which is different from a lot of experiences. Like there aren't many guys who are betting or playing DFS. So for me, it wasn't too bad. I could definitely see how it impacted some others where it's tough to kind of be locked away and there's not much to do if you're not a better or a DFS player.
Yeah, absolutely not. And so you can answer this next question either based on pre-COVID, during COVID, all of it. How did you balance school and work and gambling? And I ask every guest, did you supplement any of that with exercise and meditation, et cetera? Because I feel if you're like most people who bet or gamble or play whatever during college, your classes necessarily aren't the most important focus. But I'm curious to hear how you balanced it.
Yeah, you're spot on with that one. Where in schoolwork gambling, I put one to the side. It was really school. So classes weren't a big thing. Like it would have been nice if I guess I wanted to work harder in school, but I just didn't. And I was okay with getting B's or C's and kind of passing courses and getting a degree. So school and classes was for better or worse definitely something I put on the side there. As for like exercise or meditation, like I mean, I wish I did more exercise or meditation, but for exercise, actually, I'll go out to we've got a basketball court near my place, so I'll kind of shoot around daily for 30 minutes to an hour. That's about the exercise I'll do, and for meditation, it's just not for me. I remember in one of our business ethics course, they had to do meditation, and I was just not the biggest fan at all. So maybe something for me down the road, but not something now.
No, that's totally fair. Totally fair. So at least you balance a little bit now. We're getting some exercise. And yeah, like I said, common occurrence putting classes on the side when you have this more important focus in your mind of gambling or poker or DFS, whatever it is. And for your classes, were you the type that you could just pick it up the night before, bang it out, and be fine? Or did you have to still set aside extra time, but you just crammed it closer to the deadlines?
I wasn't even like setting aside any time. I was just kind of you kind of study the night before. Definitely like a high school mentality where study the night before or even the day of. So you'll see me. I don't even open a textbook like until halfway a semester or even ever really. So an hour or two before I'm just studying. It's something you can pick up. Like if you can probably pass the course if you pay enough attention to it. So that was something I did there.
All right. I don't know how that advice will translate to most people, right? But it is out there, and that is your experience. And transporting now to the current time, Ken, from our personal conversations, you seemingly watch every single sport. So, which sports are your favorite, either from an enjoyment, well, actually both, from an enjoyment perspective, what's your favorite sport? And then from a sweat perspective in gambling or DFS, what is your favorite sport?
There are a lot of sports, so I do watch a good amount of sports. I know you've mentioned UFC is probably one of your favorite sports or sweats. I definitely agree there. It's nice to see punch, but I mean, for me, it's probably like the Oilers. Like they're my favorite team in kind of all the sports. So I'll watch the hockey games, and right now they're in the playoffs, so I'm definitely watching that. And then for basketball and baseball, like I'll watch those, but I'll shout out like Nadal. Nadal in tennis is something actually I'll get up to watch when he plays at the majors. When he played at the Australian Open this year, it was like 12:30. So I woke up and watched that throughout the night. And when he plays at the French, it's probably 5, 6 in the morning. So I'll wake up and watch him. He's a guy that like he's a fighter, so he'll kind of grind for every point, and he'll battle and he'll fight, and like he says, you have to suffer, you have to fight, and I want to adopt that mentality, and that's something I've kind of put into my process where you have to suffer to achieve the results like greatness that he's achieved. So I'm definitely a big Nadal fan, and he'll someone I'll watch.
That's interesting. That's a great point, and I think that's a larger takeaway is listening to other successful people in other industries and hearing what makes them successful and trying to apply that to your own process. So all that was from an enjoyment perspective. What about DFS, like sweating, pure sweating the leaderboards, or gambling, pure sweating? What's your favorite?
It's the worst. Like I hate sweating. Even when I
Really?
won 50K, during that showdown, like I didn't even watch anymore. I just went upstairs and left. So I'm not sweating anything. Like I was live for maybe a showdown this past NFL year too. It was the opener in the Bucks versus the Cowboys. So I was live for that too, and I didn't even know because I was playing League of Legends. So I didn't even see myself at the top of the leaderboards. So I'm not really sweating anything. I say I'll sweat the most is baseball. I'm tracking pitch by pitch. Right now I'm even like looking at game logs and pitch by pitch. And when guys homer or guys strike out, it's like the all time worst. So that baseball is something I'll sweat a lot.
Sounds super healthy. I'll give you that, Ken. So I'll let you get out of here and get you back to sweating that baseball, and we'll talk about some final advice here. Ken, what is the most important skill in your eyes to have in being a successful sports bettor, and B, a successful DFS player?
I think I can probably group this together and give a similar answer to both, but there's so much info out there where I think the most successful skill is you have to separate from what's good info and what's bad info. And this is something I did during the draft as well, or like anything else in betting now that's so popular and mainstream. There's a lot of bad information out nowadays. So a lot of people are trying to kind of sell you stuff, and they're not giving you really how it is and the ups and downs. So if you can kind of separate what's good info, and even DFS, if you can separate what's like good plays and what's actionable plays, I would say being able to separate info and analyzing it is probably the best way to be successful.
Yeah, and especially with the influx of sports betting information now, like you said, there's a ton of bad information out there. Some good actors, some bad actors, but being able to decipher the difference between the two is incredibly important. And then finally, the whole theme of this episode, what's your advice for someone who is still young, maybe or maybe they're older and they're willing to take this risk, but primarily for the young bucks out there in their betting DFS gambling career who are seriously thinking about making the kind of move you did, finding an edge and thinking, I'm going to research every aspect of it and I'm going to go all in. And if I lose, I lose, but I think there's a great chance for me to double my money. What is your advice for that person?
I think if you're willing to put in the work, and you'll know if you put in the work. Like in one of your earlier podcasts, you asked someone what would you say to someone if they thought about going pro, and then I think their answer was like you just kind of know. So that would be kind of my answer too, where if you know you put in the edge, then you can go for it. But there's so much like bad info nowadays. Like you can't just kind of look at one thing and pretend you research this edge and then you went for it. You'll probably end up on the wrong side more than not. So that's something you have to definitely consider. If you actually have an edge and you did the research, then I'd say go for it. But unfortunately for most people listening to this, that's probably not true, and you probably didn't do the research or have the edge to go for it there.
So if you know, you know. That's your advice from Ken. So, Ken, I appreciate your time and being transparent throughout this episode. I'll give you the floor. If there's anything we haven't talked about, anything you want to promote, if you want to tell people to follow you, whatever you want to talk about, the floor is yours.
There's not much I want to promote. I want to say thanks for being on here because you've had a lot of great guys on here, so I appreciate that. I'm writing the League of Legends daily plug. I'll promote that at Occupy Fantasy, so you can check out my work. We probably start sometime next month. So, but that's it for me there.
Cool. Well, Ken, I appreciate your time. Get back to sweating baseball. Thanks for coming on the show. And everybody out there, thank you for listening.